face carved in stone, a body stretched across the sands, and a silence deeper than history. The Great Sphinx of Giza is often called a monument. But what if it was never meant to be one? What if its true purpose wasn't to glorify a king, but to communicate across time, to speak, not in words, but in something older, quieter, more enduring, a message from a forgotten age, one written not in ink, but in geometry, not in hieroglyphs, but in stone, and left out here, beneath the desert sky, waiting for someone someday to finally listen. Welcome, traveler. Tonight, as you rest your head and let the world drift away, we invite you to join us in that listening. If you find yourself drawn to the mysteries of our ancient past, we kindly ask you to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think the Sphinx is trying to tell us? Now close your eyes. Picture the Giza Plateau under the hush of midnight. The air is still. The desert breathes a slow, ancient rhythm. And there, draped in moonlight and silence, the Sphinx waits, half buried, half awake. The wind has long since stopped whispering its secrets. The stars above shimmer with cold, steady light, the same constellations that hung over this place 10,000 years ago. And in their glow, the Sphinx watches not like a statue, but like a witness. With the body of a lion stretched along the stone, and the face of something not quite human, it does not speak. It doesn't need to. The sand has swallowed and uncovered it more times than we know. Whole centuries have passed when only the head peeked above the dunes, forgotten by kings, remembered by wind. But even buried, the Sphinx was never asleep. It simply waited. They say it was carved during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre, some 4,500 years ago. But when you stand before it, in the quiet moments when the tourists are gone and the sun has set, it feels far older. Its presence is not that of a monument to a man, it feels like something else entirely. Something meant to outlast memory. The Sphinx faces east, locked in place, watching the sun rise over and over, not in days or seasons, but in epochs, before cities, before names. And if you listen closely, not with your ears, but with whatever part of you hears dreams, you may sense the Sphinx whispering still, a message etched in stillness, in shape, in survival, not asking to be understood, only to be remembered. The official story begins simply enough. According to most Egyptologists, the Great Sphinx of Giza was carved during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre, around 2500 BCE. That would place its birth squarely within Egypt's Old Kingdom, a time of great monument building, of divine kingship, and of stone rising to touch the sky. They tell us the Sphinx was shaped from a single limestone outcrop left over during the quarrying for Khafre's pyramid complex. That its face is Khafre's own, reimagined as a guardian of his eternal soul. The lion's body, they say, was chosen to represent power, kingship, the balance of animal strength and royal intellect, and that all of it, pyramid, temple, and Sphinx, was built within a few decades under the watchful eye of skilled architects and thousands of laborers. It's a beautiful story, carefully carved from hieroglyphs and fragments of stelae, matched to the style and tools of the time. In many ways, it fits. Khafre's name does appear near the Sphinx, on nearby structures. The Great Pyramid of his father, Khufu, stands nearby, anchoring this plateau in dynastic legacy. And the Sphinx itself sits nestled between temples aligned with the sun, its paws outstretched as if welcoming the day. For centuries, this version of events has been passed down through museums, books, and classrooms. It is orderly, measured, supported by what can be seen, touched, and labeled. And yet, something doesn't sit quite right. Even those who believe the official story admit that the Sphinx is unusual and outlier in many ways. Unlike the pyramids, there are no detailed records from the Old Kingdom describing its construction, no inscriptions boasting of its creation, no depiction of workers carving its shape. For something so monumental, the silence in the written record is curious. The builders of Egypt were not shy about leaving their mark. Yet here, the stone speaks louder than any scroll. Still, the mainstream view holds steady. Khafre's face. Old Kingdom tools. A lion's body born from a limestone hill. A monument to royal power in the golden age of Egypt. And perhaps, just perhaps, that's all there is to it. But when you stand before the Sphinx, when you really see it, weathered and timeless in the golden light, it feels like more. As if the story we've been told is only a surface, like the outer casing stones of a pyramid neatly placed, but covering something far older and far stranger beneath. Tonight, we are not here to reject the official story, only to listen beyond it, to wander through the questions it leaves behind. Let them settle with the sand in your mind as you drift gently deeper into thought, into sleep, into wonder. Egypt's ancient kings were not shy about leaving their names behind. They filled temple walls with their deeds, etched their triumphs into stone, and sealed their legacy in hieroglyphs meant to last for all eternity. Every monument, every obelisk, every sacred chamber told you exactly who built it, when, and why. Names were power. And to leave your name unspoken was to invite erasure from the memory of the gods. And yet, the great Sphinx bears no name, no inscription on its paws, no carving on its flanks, no dedicatory text to proclaim its creator or purpose, just silence, deep and immovable as the stone from which it was born. For a statue so vast, so singular, it should have been a royal signature, a clear statement. But there is none. This absence is not just curious, it's an anomaly. The Sphinx is the largest sculpture of its kind in all of Egypt, and yet not a single contemporary record describes its construction. No texts from Khafre's reign mention it. No tombs nearby celebrate its building. The Sphinx simply appears already ancient, already watching, as if it was always there. Some say its missing name is due to erosion, lost to time. But that explanation wears thin. Even heavily weathered temples nearby preserve fragments of their inscriptions. And in places, the Sphinx's limestone still holds clear detail, the curve of its paws, the form of its body. If a name had once been there, some trace of it should remain. But there is nothing, and that nothingness begins to whisper. Perhaps the Sphinx was built before the art of carving names was sacred. Perhaps it was never meant to carry a name at all. If it came from a time before kings, before Egypt, as we know it, then the absence of a signature makes sense, not as a loss, but as a choice. It may not be an oversight, but a message in itself, a statement made in silence, that this monument was not built for glory or conquest or even memory of a man. It was built for something else, something larger, quieter, meant to endure not through words, but through form. Imagine a people who understood that language fades, that dynasties crumble, that names are forgotten, but shapes remain. They carved not to boast, but to preserve. Not to say, look what I have made, but look what must not be lost. And so, the Sphinx sits, unnamed, undated, unclaimed, as if it belongs to no one and to everyone. In that silence, we begin to wonder, what kind of message needs no author, and why did they want it to survive, even when their names did not? Let that thought settle as you drift deeper into stillness. Sometimes, it is the absence of words that speaks the loudest. The face of the Sphinx is worn far more than it should be. Its features, once sharp and commanding, have been softened by time. The nose is gone. The contours of the mouth have blurred, and the cheeks, once carved with care, now appear melted, as if the centuries had taken a chisel of their own to it. At first glance, you might think this is what thousands of years of desert wind would do. Sand, sweeping in endless gusts across the limestone, slowly shaving it down, grain by grain. But look closer. The weathering doesn't match the wind. It isn't horizontal, as sand erosion would suggest. Instead, the deepest grooves run vertically straight down the walls of the enclosure, down the Sphinx's sides, like channels carved not by air, but by flowing water. Deep, rounded fissures, not the sharp lines of sandblasted rock, but smooth, gentle arcs, as if rain once poured over the Sphinx for centuries. But that raises a quiet, astonishing question. When was the last time it rained like that in Giza? The answer unsettles the timeline. Geologists like Dr. Robert Schoch have studied these patterns and compared them to known types of weathering. Their conclusion? The erosion on the Sphinx doesn't come from mere centuries of sand and wind. It comes from water-heavy, sustained rainfall. And the last time this part of Egypt experienced such a climate was not 2,500 BCE, but thousands of years earlier, during the African humid period, more than 7,000 years ago. This means the Sphinx may not just be older than Khafre, it may be older than Egypt itself, older than the pyramids, older than writing, perhaps older than history. It's a quiet shift, but a monumental one. If true, it would mean the Sphinx was carved not by dynastic Egyptians, but by a forgotten people. People who lived in a greener Sahara, where lakes shimmered and grasslands swayed. People whose names we do not know. People who may have left no scrolls, no cities, only this one great shape, eroded by the rains of an age long vanished. The idea is not without controversy. Many resist it. It changes too much. It rewrites too many timelines. But the stone speaks in its own language, and it is patient. The watermarks are still there, even if the textbooks choose not to see them. So tonight, we simply listen to what the stone might be telling us. That the face of the Sphinx has not just endured time, but holds its imprint. That it has felt the rains of a forgotten world. That it was already old when the pharaohs arrived. And perhaps, when the wind howls over the plateau and the stars turn above, the Sphinx remembers a time when the desert was green, and rain once ran down its face like tears. The first to truly listen to the stone was not an archaeologist, but a geologist. In the early 1990s, Dr. Robert Schoch, a professor of geology at Boston University, stood within the Sphinx enclosure and saw something others had missed. To an Egyptologist, the shape of the stone is history. To a geologist, it's memory. And Schoch could read it like a map. What he saw was unmistakable. The walls of the Sphinx pit bore deep, undulating grooves. Not the sharp, wind-cut lines one would expect from a desert, but rounded, vertical channels, evidence of water. Not just a passing rainfall or surface runoff, but centuries of heavy, sustained precipitation. Rain that could only come from a climate very different from the one we know today. Giza hasn't seen that kind of rainfall since the end of the African humid period, around 5,000 to 7,000 BCE. Before the Sahara became desert. Before dynasties. Before Egypt. That simple observation opened a door to something vast. Schoch's hypothesis was met with resistance, even ridicule. But he hadn't come looking for controversy. He was trained to study rocks, not rewrite civilizations. Still, the data spoke clearly. The limestone around the Sphinx, particularly the deepest layers of the enclosure wall, had been weathered by rain, not wind, and not just on the surface. The degradation reached deep into the rock, where the marks of ancient water still lingered in softened curves and crumbling faces. He tested the theory further, comparing the Sphinx's enclosure with nearby structures, temples built from the same limestone quarry. Those blocks showed only superficial erosion, as one would expect from thousands of years of wind-blown sand. But the Sphinx's cradle told a different story. It had been shaped by water rain that had long ceased to fall. If Schoch is right, it changes everything. It places the Sphinx's origins not in the Old Kingdom, but in a forgotten chapter of human history. A time before records, before hieroglyphs, before Egypt knew its own name. A time when people may have watched the skies and marked the stars, yet left behind no books, only stone. Some say the idea is too bold, that it reaches too far. But the earth does not lie. Its record is older than kings, more honest than scribes, and it tells us that something stood here long before the desert took hold. A monument, a message, a shape meant to last beyond memory. Tonight, we're not here to debate. We're only here to wonder, to follow the clues that time left behind, carved not by hands, but by rain, and to ask ourselves, if the Sphinx is older than Egypt, who placed it here, and what were they trying to say? Let that question echo softly as the stars rise and the sand cools, and you slip further into stillness. Before the sand, there was grass. We look at the Sahara today and see a sea of silence, dunes rippling into the distance, sun-bleached and barren. But it wasn't always this way. There was a time when the desert bloomed, a time when the wind carried not dust, but the scent of rain on leaves. This was the African humid period, a chapter of Earth's climate that began around 10,000 years ago and lasted until about 4000 BCE. During this time, monsoon rains swept across North Africa. The land blossomed. Rivers flowed where dry wadis now sit. Lakes stretched across what are now endless plains of stone and dust. Herds of gazelle and antelope grazed where the sand dunes now rest. And people lived here, fishermen, herders, wanderers of green savannas under wide, open skies. Satellite imagery has revealed the faint traces of this lost world, ancient lake beds, buried river channels, and forgotten pathways crisscrossing what is now wilderness. Cave paintings, deep in the central Sahara, show cattle, swimmers, and scenes of a thriving life that no longer exists. A memory preserved in pigment and stone. It's within this forgotten landscape that the Sphinx begins to feel at home. If the erosion on the Sphinx was truly caused by heavy, persistent rainfall, then its carving must date back to this green era, when Egypt was not a dry kingdom of sun and stone, but a land of lakes and storms. A time when carving a monument into exposed limestone would not have seemed strange, but natural. When the plateau of Giza may have been lush, teeming with life, and touched often by rain, this would place the birth of the Sphinx not in 2500 BCE, but perhaps in 7000 BCE, or earlier. And if that is true, then the Sphinx is not merely old. It is prehistoric, carved by a people who lived not in cities but in something simpler. A people without written records, without empires, without kings as we know them. And yet, they carved something that still stands, watching the horizon, long after their world has vanished beneath the sand. It makes you wonder, what kind of people build something that speaks across 10,000 years? Were they warning us, guiding us, or simply marking the passing of time, the rise and fall of sky and rain? The desert that now surrounds the Sphinx hides more than sand. It hides a forgotten climate, a lost memory of Earth itself. And within that memory, a shape remains half lion, half man etched into the stone before deserts knew their name. Let that image settle with you as the wind grows still and the stars look down, unchanged. Somewhere beneath the silence, green echoes linger, and the Sphinx remembers. There is a stone tucked away in Cairo's museum, weathered and cracked, its carving softened by age. It's called the Inventory Stele, and though small in size, it tells a story that echoes like thunder across the desert sands. Carved sometime during Egypt's 26th dynasty, nearly 2,000 years after the time of Khufu, it claims to record an even older memory, a record of restoration, not creation. And in its lines, the Sphinx emerges, not as a new wonder of Khafre's reign, but as something already ancient, something Khufu himself found, half buried in sand and honored with offerings. The stele tells us that Khufu did not build the Sphinx. Instead, he repaired it. He built temples beside it, He paid homage to it as a sacred site, one that already bore the weight of time. In the story, Khufu discovers a temple to Isis near the Sphinx and commands its restoration. This is not the language of a builder boasting of his grand works. It is the voice of a king standing in awe before something far older, something whose origins he could only guess. Mainstream scholars dismiss the inventory stele as a later invention, a product of the Sate revival, when ancient Egypt was looking back to its own golden age with nostalgia. They argue that it was meant to lend legitimacy to temples by connecting them to older gods and older kings. A kind of political myth-making. Perhaps that's true, but there is something haunting in its words. Even if carved later, it reflects a belief held by Egyptians themselves that the Sphinx was old long before their time, that the great kings of the Fourth Dynasty were not the architects of Giza's mysteries, but the inheritors of something left behind, something they did not fully understand. This idea fits with the Sphinx's silence, with the erosion, with the missing inscriptions. It fits with the sense you feel when you stand before it, that this was not made for one man's glory, but for reasons that stretch beyond any single life, any single reign. If Khufu found the Sphinx already there, already watching, then who built it? And what kind of world did they live in? The inventory stele does not give us those answers, but it hints. It leans in close and whispers that Egypt's own kings may have been standing on the shoulders of something far older than even they knew. Tonight, let that thought drift through your mind like desert wind. The idea that even the mighty Khufu, builder of the Great Pyramid, once stood in the shadow of the Sphinx and wondered, just as we do now, who carved this face in stone? And why does it still watch us so patiently after all this time? Between the paws of the great Sphinx, weathered by wind and sun, rests a tall stone tablet cracked at the top, worn at the edges. This is the dream stele of Thutmose IV, and like the Sphinx itself, it guards a secret, half told and half buried. It was placed there around 1400 BCE, nearly 1,000 years after Khafre is said to have carved the Sphinx. According to the stele, Thutmose was still a young prince, not yet pharaoh, when he fell asleep in the shadow of the lion-bodied guardian. In his dream, the Sphinx spoke to him not as a statue but as a god. It promised him the throne of Egypt if he would clear away the sands that had swallowed its form. Thutmose awoke and obeyed. He uncovered the Sphinx, freed it from centuries of silence, and inscribed the dream in stone for all to see. Or, at least for those who could still read the fading script. The top portion of the stele has broken away, taking with it words we may never recover. But what remains is enough to stir the imagination. This story, carved into granite, does not claim the Sphinx was newly built. It speaks of it as something already buried, already old, already powerful. There is no mention of Khafre, no reference to its construction, only a sense of reverence of rediscovery. Thutmose is not the creator of a monument, but the chosen servant of a mystery. He does not shape the Sphinx. He answers it. He dreams beneath its gaze and listens. Some say the dream stele is just royal propaganda, a clever way for Thutmose to justify his unexpected rise to power. And perhaps that's true. But propaganda does not need to invent a monument buried in sand. That part, the Sphinx's ancient silence, was already real. The stele reflects something more than politics. It reveals a pattern. Over and over, we see Egypt's rulers treating the Sphinx not as their own creation, but as an inheritance, a relic, a riddle. Why would Thutmose need to excavate it at all, if it had truly been built only a few centuries before? Would the sands bury a monument so completely, so soon after its creation? Or had it already stood for far longer than we've been told, long enough to be forgotten, swallowed, and rediscovered again? The dream stele gives us no firm answers, only a whisper. A moment caught between sleep and waking, where a prince hears the voice of stone. And perhaps, in that dream, we catch a glimpse of truth, one not written in history, but held in silence. As you rest tonight, imagine lying between the paws of the Sphinx yourself. Imagine sleep falling over you like sand. And in that deep, still quiet, imagine a voice calling softly not from the sky, but from beneath the earth. A voice that has waited thousands of years for you to listen. The Sphinx stares east, unblinking, as it has for thousands of years. But behind that still gaze lies a riddle older than language, a question carved not just in stone, but in stars. Its body, crouched low to the ground, is unmistakably leonine. Muscular, powerful, a lion frozen mid-prowl. Its paws stretch forward in quiet strength, while its flanks curl back like coiled energy held in place by time. The human face may have weathered and crumbled, but the body still whispers its original shape. Why a lion? In ancient Egypt, animals were not chosen lightly. Every form was sacred, symbolic, woven into the fabric of the cosmos. The lion represented strength, divinity, protection. It guarded temples. It stood watch at the edges of the known world. And in the sky above, the constellation Leo, also a lion, rises with the summer sun, its curve of stars arching over the desert like a celestial guardian. Some researchers have proposed a startling idea that the Sphinx may once have faced its twin not in stone, but in the heavens. Thousands of years ago, around 10,500 BCE, the constellation Leo would have risen directly in the east at the moment of the spring equinox. And where would the Sphinx have been looking? Straight at it, lion to lion, earth to sky, as if the monument were aligned not with a calendar, but with a memory one etched in stars instead of books. This isn't just poetic, it's geometry. The Sphinx's orientation, its eastern gaze, and the rising point of Leo, all fit. It's as if someone long ago knew how to set the lion of earth in harmony with the lion of the sky. Mainstream archaeology is cautious, often dismissing such alignments as coincidence. But in the ancient world, nothing about the stars was accidental. Temples, tombs, pyramids, all were built with stellar precision. The heavens were a clock, a map, a mirror, and Leo was not just a pattern of stars, it was a season, a god, a symbol of rebirth. If the Sphinx was carved during this distant epoch, as some believe, then its lion shape makes perfect sense. It wasn't just an artistic choice, it was a marker, a message in silhouette, pointing back to an age we've forgotten. Perhaps its builders were sky watchers, marking the turning of the great year, the 25,920-year cycle of Earth's wobble through the stars. Perhaps they carved the Sphinx not just to honor Leo, but to anchor it to tether time itself to the sands of Giza. And so the Sphinx remains, lion-bodied and timeless, gazing where Leo once rose, long before pyramids, before papyrus, before pharaohs. A stone guardian mirroring the stars, waiting for someone to notice that the sky, too, tells stories, and that some stories are written in both heaven and earth. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, imagine the Lion of Giza watching the horizon not for enemies, but for the return of its twin in the sky. Imagine stone and starlight whispering across ages, remembering together. The stars do not stand still. They drift, slowly, over thousands of years, a quiet wobble in the Earth's axis, called precession. It's subtle, invisible across a single lifetime. But over millennia, it becomes a cosmic clock, a turning of the heavens so vast and patient, only the most ancient monuments seem to notice. This is where the age of Leo enters the story. Roughly every 2,160 years, the sun rises in a new zodiac constellation on the spring equinox, marking a new astrological age. Today, we live on the cusp between Pisces and Aquarius. But if you turn the clock backwards, far, far back, to around 10,500 BCE, the rising sun, would have been framed by the stars of Leo. And what faces that very rising sun with unbroken stillness? The Sphinx. Its gaze is locked due east, precisely where the sun emerges on the equinox. And around 12,000 years ago, when Leo ruled the skies at dawn, the great lion of Giza would have looked directly at its heavenly counterpart, earth and sky mirroring each other. A lion in the sand, a lion in the stars. It's a poetic alignment, but more than that, it's exact. Some researchers, like Robert Bauval and Graham Hancock, argue that this is no coincidence. They point to the Sphinx's orientation and the layout of the pyramids beside it, especially the way the three great pyramids mimic the belt stars of Orion. They suggest that Giza itself is a kind of star map frozen in stone, recording not the sky of Khafre's time, but that of 10,500 BCE. Mainstream archaeology resists this idea. The dates don't match accepted timelines. There are no written records from 10,500 BCE, no clear evidence of civilization, let alone monument building, and yet the alignments persist. The Sphinx looks where Leo once rose. The pyramids mimic Orion's belt. The correlations are precise, stubborn, and silent. If the Sphinx really does commemorate the age of Leo, then it would mean it predates dynastic Egypt by over 7,000 years. That someone somehow had the knowledge to track the stars, to measure time not in years but in ages, and to fix that knowledge in stone where it could not be forgotten. Perhaps they built not just for their world, but for the ones that would follow. For us. Imagine the patience required to carve a monument that would only make sense 10,000 years later. Imagine understanding time not as a river, but as a cycle, a wheel turning slowly through the heavens, where each age rises and falls like the sun. And now, as you lay still and quiet, let yourself drift through those turning skies, past Pisces and Aries, back through Taurus and Gemini, until you find Leo, rising once more. And beneath it, in the hush of pre-dawn light, the Sphinx still watches, not from history, but from eternity. The Sphinx stands not just as a question, but as a contradiction. Carved with precision and purpose, it rises from the Giza Plateau like a memory that refuses to fade. Its body, eroded by rain, hints at a time long before the pharaohs. Its gaze, fixed on the rising sun of 10,500 BCE, suggests a knowledge of the stars more ancient than dynastic Egypt. And yet, there are no records, no inscriptions, no names. So who built it? If it was not the Egyptians of the 4th dynasty, as the textbooks claim, then we are left with a deeper mystery, one that pulls at the threads of history until the whole tapestry begins to shift. Some researchers believe the answer lies not in what we've found, but in what's missing. The Sphinx, the pyramids, the massive stone temples nearby, they appear suddenly, fully formed, without any clear evolution. There are no earlier prototypes, no scaffolding of progress, just colossal precision appearing out of nowhere, like a candle flaring to life in the dark. This has led to a bold, unsettling possibility that these monuments were not the beginning of civilization, but the end of something far older, a lost civilization, not myth, but memory. A culture that may have risen during the last ice age, flourished in the fertile green Sahara, and vanished before history began. Their cities washed away, their knowledge scattered, their language dissolved into silence. Only their stone remained. Perhaps they understood the heavens in ways we no longer do. Perhaps they mastered geometry, resonance, and engineering at a level that allowed them to shape monuments that could survive cataclysm. They did not carve names into walls, they carved meaning into alignments, ratios, and stone itself. If the Sphinx is their message, then what were they trying to say? Some believe they saw what was coming: a great flood, a climate collapse, a turning of the world. And so they built something that could endure it. Not a city, not a story, but a symbol. A a riddle in the form of a lion, facing the dawn of a new age. We may never know their names, but in a way, they are still speaking. Through the weathered lines of the Sphinx, through the harmony of the stars above Giza, through the silence that grows deeper the more we listen. Tonight, let your thoughts wander to that lost world, a place of green valleys and ancient watchers of the sky. A people who understood that time would erase everything except the stone and the stars and the quiet whisper of a monument that still waits to be understood. The Sphinx was not made to be remembered. It was made so that we would not forget. Beneath the desert stars, the Sphinx lies not as a conqueror but as a question. Not as a boast, but perhaps as a warning. If a forgotten civilization truly carved it, then we must ask the deeper question, not how, but why. Why would they shape this creature out of stone? Why a lion, silent and still, facing the dawn? Why leave no names, no claims, no tribute to kings or gods? Perhaps it was never meant to celebrate power. Perhaps it was never meant to be understood by the people of its own time. Perhaps the Sphinx was not made for them, but for us. Imagine a world teetering on the edge, rain growing scarce, rivers fading, the green lands shrinking into dust, a civilization watching the sky and seeing change written in the stars. Not a sudden collapse, but a slow unraveling, a truth too large to stop and too painful to forget. So they did the one thing that might survive. They carved a message into the earth itself. They made a creature to watch the rising Sunday, to endure the flood, the drought, the silence. They built not a monument of glory, but a monument of memory. A question sealed in stone, waiting for a time when someone might finally ask the right things. Why a lion? Because it endures, because it guards, because it connects the heavens to the earth. Why no inscriptions? Because words fade, because languages die. But geometry, alignment, stone, those last. The Sphinx is not a history book. It is a symbol, a compass, a puzzle designed for those who come after. Perhaps it was meant to stir something in us, curiosity, wonder. A whisper that says, "You are not the first to stand here, and you may not be the last." In this view, the Sphinx is not a tomb, but a lifeboat carrying fragments of a vanished world across the sea of time, waiting for another civilization to awaken, to find it, and to remember. Not their names, but their wisdom, their warning. To build something for the future is an act of hope. To carve a riddle into stone, knowing you may never live to see it solved, is a kind of love. And maybe that is the truest reason. They weren't just builders. They were dreamers of deep time, guardians of knowledge. And in the silence of the Sphinx, their voice remains not loud, but enduring. So tonight, lie still and imagine the minds behind the stone. What they feared, what they loved, what they hoped we might one day understand. The Sphinx was not built to impress. It was built to endure and to be found again. In all of Egypt, silence is rare. Walls are covered with hieroglyphs, names of pharaohs, hymns to gods, spells to guide the dead. Even the tombs of commoners hold carvings and colors, stories etched to outlast flesh. Egypt speaks across the ages in stone and pigment, never shy to tell its tale. And yet, the Sphinx says nothing. No cartouche names its builder. No dedication tells us who commanded its creation. No inscription explains its purpose. Not a single hieroglyph, not even a fragment of script, has been found carved into its flanks or hidden beneath its paws. For such a colossal monument, this absence is not just unusual, it's astonishing. The Great Pyramid, though mysterious, still holds traces of builders' marks in hidden chambers. Other temples shout their purpose from every pillar. But the Sphinx? It remains mute, stoic, watching. This silence may be the loudest clue of all. Perhaps it wasn't meant to speak in the usual ways. Perhaps it was carved in a time before writing, before language as we know it. Or perhaps the builders chose silence deliberately, a kind of sacred restraint, a way to protect meaning from the erosion not just of wind and rain, but of interpretation. Words can be twisted, translations fail, languages die, but form endures. A lion's body, an eastward gaze, an alignment to the stars. These speak in the universal tongue of mathematics and astronomy. No Rosetta Stone is needed to understand where the Sphinx looks or how the sun rises in its line of sight. These are truths that reach across time. The Sphinx may not speak, but it shows. Its proportions, its position, its relation to the pyramids, they tell a story in shadow and shape. A story that bypasses the eyes and finds its way into the bones. You don't read the Sphinx. You feel it. You stand before it, and something ancient inside you stirs, as though recognizing something it never learned. What if that was the point? If a lost civilization built the Sphinx to preserve knowledge for a far future, then silence may have been the only safe vessel. No scroll can survive 10,000 years. No carved language can guarantee understanding. But a monument can wait. It needs no translator. It needs no priest. It's simply island. So tonight, as the world quiets and sleep draws near, picture the Sphinx not as a statue, but as a whisper carved into the earth. A message not meant to be read, but felt. A shape that holds meaning beyond words. A monument that chose silence, because silence, in the end, lasts longer than any voice. And perhaps, in your own stillness, you'll begin to hear what it was always trying to say. Stone forgets nothing. Long after scrolls have crumbled to dust, after papyrus has faded and libraries have burned, stone remains. It does not need ink. It does not beg for understanding. It simply waits, weathering time with a patience no page could ever match. The ancients knew this. Perhaps that's why they turned to stone, not just to build, but to remember. In a world where language evolves, where kings fall and gods are renamed, stone is the only constant. It can outlive rivers, outlast dynasties. It can lie buried for centuries, then rise again, unchanged, untouched by the tides that sweep through human history. The Sphinx is carved from a single mass of limestone. It is not assembled, not pieced together like a tomb or temple. It is revealed as if uncovered from the bedrock itself, sculpted out of the earth to serve as a sentinel not only for its own time, but for all time. No message written on a scroll could have lasted this long. No paint, no parchment, no clever code. Only stone could hold such a burden. And not just any stone, but one placed precisely, shaped deliberately, aligned with stars and sunrise. A monument not just of art or belief, but of memory. If the Sphinx holds a message, then its silence is not a flaw, it's a feature. Whoever carved it, whether a forgotten people, an early priesthood, or some long-lost culture, we can guess at their intention. They knew collapse would come. They knew that floods, sand, and forgetfulness would erase everything. So they left no book, no temple record. They carved their message into the only medium they could trust, because stone does not need someone to read it. It only needs someone to notice. Its proportions become the paragraph, its gaze, the punctuation, its endurance, the meaning. The Sphinx is a memory too large for words, too deep for language. It doesn't tell you what to think. It reminds you that something once was, and that it's still island. Empires have risen and fallen around it. Names have changed. Beliefs have shifted. But the Sphinx hasn't moved, not even once. That is its power. Not just in what it may represent, but in what it survives. Tonight, as you drift toward dreams, think of all the voices the world has lost. All the wisdom, the stories, the warnings swept away by time. And then think of the Sphinx, lying under the stars, wind-scarred and ancient, but still here, still listening, still remembering. Stone, after all, may be the oldest form of memory we have, and the Sphinx may be the most faithful witness of all. Long before humans spoke in alphabets or scratched symbols into clay, we understood the language of shape. Geometry was our first script. A circle, a square, a triangle, these are not just drawings. They are ideas, eternal and universal, etched into the very structure of the world. And the builders of the Sphinx may have known this better than we do. Look at how it lies, perfectly aligned, facing due east, locked to the rising sun on the spring equinox. That is not an accident. That is intention. A direction chosen not for beauty, but for meaning. A marker not just for days or years, but for ages. The sun returns again and again to that point. Each equinox a reminder, each dawn a signal. Now consider its form, the proportions of its body, the symmetry of its paws, the mysterious blending of human and animal. This isn't art for art's sake. This is language, not in words, but in measurements, in ratios, in balance. In ancient times, geometry was not merely mathematics. It was sacred. The Egyptians saw it as the key to the divine order. To understand geometry was to understand the mind of the cosmos, and to build with it was to encode ideas into structure. Ideas too important to leave to fragile papyrus, or the fading memory of priests. Could the Sphinx itself be a message in form? If so, what might it say? That the builders knew the earth's movement, that they understood the heavens, that they possessed a grasp of harmony between structure and space, between land and sky, and that they wished to communicate this, not in words that might be lost, but in patterns that any advanced mind, in any age, could recognize. Consider this. Mathematics doesn't change. Pi is the same in 2500 BCE as it is now. The golden ratio remains constant. The eastward sun rises on the same path it did 10,000 years ago. These are truths that never need translation. And perhaps that was the point, to build something that speaks not to a culture, but to consciousness itself. The Sphinx, then, becomes not just a monument, but a kind of encoded memory one, written in proportions and placements, a message not just to us, but to any who might one day rediscover the pattern behind the sand. Not a declaration of power, but a whisper of knowing. So tonight, let your mind drift to that quiet form beneath the stars. Not reading it, but sensing it. Let your breath slow as you imagine what it would be like to build for eternity, to shape meaning into stone, knowing you will not be there to explain. The Sphinx doesn't speak. It doesn't need to. Its message is geometry, and its audience is the future. It stares across the ages, a creature neither fully lion nor fully man. The Sphinx is a fusion, a paradox carved in stone, a riddle not just in form, but in meaning. What does it mean to give the body of a lion the face of a human? Why blend the primal with the conscious, the earthly with the divine? In the myths that came later, the Sphinx was seen as a guardian, a keeper of thresholds. In Greece, it posed riddles. In Egypt, it watched over tombs and temples. But the Sphinx of Giza is older than those stories. Older, perhaps, than the myths themselves. And that makes its form even more mysterious. The lion is the hunter, the protector, the strength of the wild world, rooted in instinct and power. The human face, calm and expressionless, adds another layer: intelligence, awareness, a sense of stillness not found in animals. Together, they create something more than either alone a symbol of duality, the body of the earth, the mind of the stars. It's a union of opposites, matter and mind, muscle and thought, survival and transcendence. Perhaps it was meant to remind us that we, too, are hybrids, part animal, part something more. Creatures who eat and sleep and fear, but also imagine, measure, and dream of the stars. In ancient symbology, hybrid beings often served as messages. Not just what they looked like, but what they represented. A merging of worlds, a bridge between realms. Could the Sphinx be more than a guardian? Could it be a kind of key? A code, using form instead of words. Its silence suggests it wasn't made for one culture or faith. Its form, timeless, unreadable, suggests it wasn't meant to be interpreted by logic alone. Perhaps it was made to stir something deeper. Recognition, a sense of the eternal. A feeling that says, this matters, even if we cannot say why. It doesn't demand worship. It doesn't explain itself. It only watches, with that calm human face, as the sun rises again and again, age after age. Its gaze is not fierce, but knowing, as if it remembers something we've forgotten. And maybe that's the purpose of its form, not to declare, but to remind, that within each of us is a lion and a thinker, that strength without wisdom is chaos, that wisdom without strength is silence. But together, they form something sacred. Tonight, as you lie still under your own stretch of stars, let the image of the Sphinx rise in your mind, not just as a statue, but as a mirror. Half beast, half mind. Entirely a mystery, watching the horizon, not as a monument, but as a message. And perhaps, just perhaps, a reflection. Each morning, as the world turns and darkness slips into dawn, the Sphinx does not blink. It watches. Silent and still, it faces the eastern horizon with unwavering focus, as if waiting for something not bound to a single sunrise, but to the very rhythm of time itself. Its alignment is no accident. The Sphinx faces due east, exactly where the sun rises on the spring equinox, a day when light and dark are in perfect balance. To align stone with such precision requires more than architectural skill. It requires awareness of the heavens, of the earth, of the turning wheel of the cosmos. Why would the builders do this? Perhaps the answer lies in what the Sphinx sees. It sees beginnings. It watches the return of light after night, spring after winter, balance after shadow. It does not mark hours, but epochs. It is not a clock, but a compass, pointing always toward renewal. This constant gaze toward the east suggests a purpose beyond the symbolic. It ties the Sphinx to cycles far older than dynasties. Cycles of climate, of stars, of memory and forgetting. It may even whisper of the great year, the precession of the equinoxes, a 26,000-year wobble in Earth's axis that slowly shifts the position of the sunrise against the background of stars. To track such a cycle requires patience measured not in decades but in millennia. And yet the Sphinx watches. Its orientation may be the clue that this monument was not carved for its own time, but for one far in the future. A civilization that understood the stars could stand in its shadow and say, now. This is the moment they meant, because stone holds still while the sky moves, and from that contrast, a message can emerge. To face the rising sun is to face hope, but it's also to face memory. For the light that returns each day carries the echo of all the mornings before. The Sphinx, in its stillness, reflects that eternal cycle: life, death, rebirth, rise, fall, return. Perhaps this is what the builders wanted us to see, not just a statue, but an axis, a fixed point around which time flows, a witness to the great turning of the ages, the slow procession of forgotten histories and future awakenings. So tonight, as your eyes grow heavy and your breath begins to slow, imagine yourself lying beneath the eastern sky, the same one the Sphinx has watched for thousands of years. Let the rhythm of time pass through you, sunrise to sunrise, season to season, age to age. The Sphinx faces east, not to remember the past, but to welcome what comes next. A guardian of beginnings, a monument, a line to the soul of time. Beneath the Sphinx, the stone is not silent. For centuries, its great body has crouched on the Giza Plateau, still and unmoving, but the earth beneath tells another story. It has been poked, scanned, and surveyed by radar and seismograph, and what those instruments found has only deepened the mystery. Because under the paws of the Sphinx, under the plateau itself, there are voids, empty chambers, spaces that should not exist. In the 1990s, seismic surveys conducted by researchers including Thomas Dobecki and John Anthony West revealed something unexpected: rectangular cavities beneath the front paws and along the flanks of the Sphinx. Hollow areas, sharply defined, not the random gaps you might expect from natural erosion, but something more deliberate, something made. Later scans, including ground-penetrating radar, confirmed more anomalies: right angles where none should be. Chambers with clear boundaries, buried in bedrock, silent, sealed, and never officially explored. Egyptian authorities have long dismissed these findings, insisting they are natural fissures or irrelevant geological quirks. But even Dr. Zahi Hawass, the famous Egyptologist, once admitted that something lies beneath the Sphinx, something old, something closed off. And when questions are asked why these chambers are not excavated, why further exploration is denied, the answers are vague. The doors, it seems, are not just buried. They are metaphorically locked. What could lie beneath such an ancient monument? Some believe these underground spaces are connected to the mythical Hall of Records, a repository of ancient knowledge said to have been hidden away before a great catastrophe. Others see them as tombs or unfinished sanctuaries. But the truth is, we don't know, and that not knowing, that deliberate avoidance, is almost louder than any discovery. The Sphinx itself may be only the surface, a symbol, a marker, a signpost pointing to something deeper, quite literally. If its builders intended to leave a message for the future, might they not have protected it in the most enduring vault of all? Not a room of stone, but one beneath it, hidden from time, waiting for the right moment or the right mind to unlock it. And so the Sphinx watches above, while something waits below. Tonight, as you rest, let your thoughts drift downward. Beneath the sand, beneath the stone. Imagine walking through ancient corridors sealed for thousands of years, the air untouched since a forgotten hand last laid the final block. What would you find? What would it mean? Sometimes the greatest secrets lie not in the monuments we see, but in the silence beneath our feet. And perhaps, just perhaps, the Sphinx is not the final mystery, but the key to one still waiting in the dark. Giza is not alone. Across the world, scattered like fragments of a forgotten puzzle, there are places that echo its mystery, ancient sites that whisper of lost knowledge, of civilizations erased by time, yet remembered in stone. In the hills of southeastern Turkey lies Göbekli Tepe. At first glance, it seems unremarkable, a tangle of buried ruins beneath a grassy mound. But as archaeologists peeled back the earth, they revealed massive stone pillars arranged in circular temples, carved with animals and abstract symbols. Radiocarbon dating places its construction at around 9,600 BCE, over 7,000 years older than the pyramids, older than agriculture, older than writing. It rewrote what we thought we knew about early humanity. And like the Sphinx, it raises a quiet but staggering question. Who were these people? And what were they trying to say? Far across the ocean, off the coast of Japan, lies Yonaguni, a set of submerged stone terraces and geometric formations resting beneath the waves. Divers have found sharp angles, staircase-like ledges, and what some claim are inscriptions or animal carvings, all carved into bedrock. Mainstream scholars argue it could be natural, shaped by water and time, but others see design, pattern, intention. And if it is man-made, then it must be from a time when this land was above water, perhaps 10,000 years ago or more. when sea levels were drastically lower, like the Sphinx. It would be the legacy of a civilization now vanished beneath the elements. Then there is Pumapunku in the Bolivian Andes. High above sea level, thousands of miles from Egypt, this site contains megalithic blocks of andesite, some weighing over 100 tons, cut and shaped with a precision that defies explanation. Perfect right angles, drill holes, interlocking joints, not just stones, but engineering. Modern tools would struggle to replicate such accuracy at that scale, and yet no clear records remain of who built it or how. All these places, Giza, Göbekli Tepe, Yonaguni, Pumapunku, are separated by oceans, by languages, by mythologies, and yet they share common threads. Massive stone constructions, advanced geometry, alignments to stars or cardinal points, and above all, mystery. They do not seem to emerge gradually from earlier, simpler designs. They appear suddenly, fully formed, like echoes from a forgotten age. An age that may have fallen to flood, to fire, to the long erosion of memory, but not before leaving behind markers, clues, monuments not for worship, but for warning, for remembering. Could these sites be the scattered remnants of a once connected world? A global civilization lost to history, but not to time. As you drift tonight into sleep, let your thoughts wander not just through deserts, but across oceans, beneath waves, into mountains. Stone remembers. And if you listen closely, you may begin to hear the pattern, the same voice, speaking in different places, saying, "We were here, and we knew." The legend of Atlantis begins, not in folklore or fantasy, but in philosophy. Plato, writing over 2,000 years ago, described a land beyond the Pillars of Hercules, a powerful, advanced civilization that rose in glory and fell in a single terrible day. Earthquakes, floods, a continent swallowed by the sea. He called it Atlantis. A memory, he claimed, passed down from Egyptian priests to Solon, a tale older than memory itself. Most scholars treat it as allegory, a metaphor for human hubris, a cautionary tale. But what if it wasn't? Across time, the idea of Atlantis has refused to fade. It persists, resurfacing in esoteric writings, in whispered traditions, and in stories passed down through countless cultures. The Hopi speak of previous worlds destroyed by water. The ancient Indian texts describe civilizations lost beneath the waves. Even in the Old Testament, echoes of great floods ripple through human memory. In the early 20th century, American mystic Edgar Cayce brought Atlantis back into the modern imagination. In trance-like states, he described a technologically advanced culture, destroyed around 10,000 BCE, a timeline that eerily aligns with the end of the last ice age. Cayce claimed that survivors of Atlantis fled to Egypt, Peru, and Central America, bringing with them knowledge of astronomy, architecture, and energy. He spoke of a hall of records, buried beneath the Sphinx, containing scrolls and instruments left by these survivors. A time capsule from a civilization long drowned. Of course, there is no direct evidence, no plaque that reads, "Atlantis was here," and yet, there are hints. Pyramids, rising from deserts and jungles. Ancient maps that seem to chart coastlines, now lost beneath oceans. Megaliths, too vast and too precise to belong to their supposed time. Stories of floods and star teachers found on every continent. Could it be that Atlantis, or something like it, was real not as a singular city, but as a phase of humanity we've forgotten? The Sphinx, staring eastward toward a sun that rose on another age, might be one of their markers. Not a monument to power, but a warning. A memory carved in stone by those who knew how fragile civilizations can be. A message to those who would one day stand on shifting sand and wonder who came before. Tonight, as the world grows still and your thoughts begin to drift, imagine that ancient land, its towers and temples, its lights reflected in waters now gone. And imagine its people, looking up at a darkening sky, knowing the sea was coming. They could not stop it, but they could remember. And so they built. They left signs, not in books, but in stars. Not in voices, but in silence. And across the ages, their whispers still find us. What if Atlantis never truly vanished, but simply went underground, waiting for us to listen again? Beneath the heavy paws of the Sphinx, there are whispers of something more. Not in the air, but in the stone, in the empty spaces sensed, but never seen. For centuries, stories have circulated of a hidden chamber, sealed beneath the Giza Plateau, a vault untouched by time, a library of memory buried in the bedrock. They call it the Hall of Records. The idea may sound like legend, but it didn't begin in fantasy. The earliest roots trace back to the mystics and dreamers, those like Edgar Cayce, who spoke of ancient knowledge preserved underground by a civilization lost to flood and fire. Cayce described this hall as a repository of scrolls, maps, and devices, not from Egypt's dynasties, but from Atlantis itself, a time capsule for an uncertain future. He said it would be found beneath the Sphinx, near its right paw, a precise location, a place chosen not for grandeur, but for endurance. Then came the science. In the early 1990s, seismic surveys were conducted near the Sphinx. They revealed hollow spaces, chambers beneath the monument, some with clear geometric outlines, not natural voids, not random cracks. Structured, intentional. One in particular matches the location Cayce described. Official excavations were never permitted, and when questions arose, answers were few. Denials came quickly. Permissions were withdrawn. The mystery deepened. Could the Hall of Records be real? If so, what might it contain? Not treasures of gold, but of thought. Records not of kings and wars, but of knowledge, astronomy, mathematics, perhaps even a forgotten science. Blueprints of how a lost civilization once lived in harmony with earth and sky. It wouldn't need to be large, just precise. Just enough to light the spark again. Or maybe the hall is symbolic, a metaphor carved into the ground, a suggestion that beneath the monuments we revere lie deeper truths beneath history, a prehistory, beneath civilization, something older. And maybe the real hall is not a room at all, but a realization, a place the mind must uncover before the hands are allowed to follow. But if it is real, then why hide it? Perhaps those who buried it knew that knowledge can be both gift and curse, that wisdom unlocked too soon or by the wrong hands can destroy instead of guide. And so they sealed it beneath a monument of silence, where only the truly ready might think to look. Tonight, as you rest and drift into sleep, imagine that chamber still sealed, still waiting, dustless, undisturbed. What wisdom waits in the quiet below the sand? What truth, still too heavy for daylight, sleeps in the earth? And when we are ready, will the Sphinx finally allow us in? The Sphinx is carved from a single ridge of limestone, its body over 240 feet long, its paws stretched forward, its gaze fixed eternally east. But while the monument itself endures, the tools that supposedly shaped it have vanished, if they ever existed at all. According to the official story, the Sphinx was carved around 2500 BCE, during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre. If so, then the artisans of that time would have used simple tools, copper chisels, stone hammers, and wooden sleds. No iron, no steel. And yet, the Sphinx is no crude sculpture. Its lines are smooth. Its core body, especially along the flanks, is carved with confidence and precision. Even the hard limestone layers near its base, some far tougher than the upper strata, show cuts and shaping that baffle modern stonemasons. The builders didn't just chisel, they sculpted, with a vision and with control. But copper, as soft as it is, dulls quickly against limestone. Modern experiments show how inefficient such tools would be. Chisels would bend, break, need constant reshaping. The scale of the work, the sheer mass of rock removed, shaped, and smoothed, would have required tens of thousands of copper tools. And yet not one has been found near the Sphinx. No workshop, no cache of tools, no inscriptions boasting of the feat. Just the monument itself, silent as ever. And there's more. Around the Sphinx are deep trenches, walls cut vertically, sometimes at awkward angles, showing a level of precision difficult to achieve even with modern machinery. These aren't the rough gouges of trial and error. These are clean, intentional. Some researchers suggest that advanced techniques must have been used, tools not yet rediscovered, or long lost to time. This raises an unsettling question. If the tools don't match the monument, then maybe the timeline doesn't either. Maybe the Sphinx was carved long before copper tools were ever used. Maybe by hands that had knowledge, now forgotten knowledge, of how to work with stone, not just physically but intelligently. In ancient myths, the gods and sages of old wielded tools of light, sound, and vibration. Fiction, perhaps, but fiction often echoes something deeper. A memory of a time when building in stone was not about brute force, but resonance, harmony. Tonight, as the stars begin their slow dance across the sky, imagine the Sphinx being born not with hammers, but with understanding. Imagine its form emerging not from 100 years of sweat, but from an older rhythm. A rhythm that shapes stone the way music shapes silence. The tools are missing, but the Sphinx remains. And sometimes, what is not found tells us more than what is. Imagine a people who knew they were going to be forgotten, not through negligence or fading memory, but through cataclysm, through something so vast, so irreversible, that it would wipe their names from the stones, wash away their stories, scatter their cities to dust. A flood, a shifting climate, a tilt of the heavens. And yet, even as the world changed around them, they chose to leave something behind. Not a book, not a scroll, but a shape in stone. The Sphinx. It does not boast. It does not explain itself. It does not carry the names of kings or the carved declarations of dynasty. It does not cry out for worship. It's simply island watching, enduring, waiting. What kind of civilization chooses to speak through silence? What kind of wisdom knows that language dies, but proportions endure? That names are erased, but geometry remains. Perhaps one that saw the long arc of time, one that understood that history is not linear, but a cycle that rise is followed by fall, and fall by forgetting. And so they carved the Sphinx, not as a monument to pride, but as a message for the future. A marker placed like a seed into the earth, not knowing who would find it, not knowing when, but trusting that someone would. Someone who could read the alignment of the gaze, the pattern of erosion, the mystery of the missing tools. Someone who would wonder why it points east, why it bears the scars of water in a desert, why no pharaoh ever claimed it as his own. This was not a monument to themselves, it was a gift, or perhaps a warning, because the Sphinx does not offer answers. It offers a question. What have we lost? It may be the last breath of a civilization not driven by empire or conquest, but by the knowledge that it was fading. A farewell carved in stone by people who knew their story would not survive in words. And so they gave us something else, a shape that would outlast empires, a silence that would outlast language, a gaze fixed on the rising sun waiting for another dawn. Tonight, as the world grows quiet, lie back and listen to the hush between thoughts. That's where the message lives, in the stillness, in the stone. Not a cry for help, but a whisper of remembrance. A reminder that once, long ago, a people looked into the future and chose not to be forgotten, even if their names never made it. In the hush beneath the stars, the Sphinx rests in silence. But the silence is not only ancient, it is modern too. A silence carefully maintained. For decades, whispers of underground chambers, anomalous erosion, and inexplicable precision have circled the Sphinx like desert wind. And yet, when these questions grow too loud, they are met not with answers, but with resistance. Why? In the early 1990s, seismic tests revealed cavities beneath the Sphinx, geometric shapes, empty spaces where solid stone should be. The data was real. The anomalies, measurable. And yet, permission to explore them further was denied. Just like that, the sands were swept back into place not by nature, but by decree. It has happened again and again. Research suggesting an older Sphinx, shaped by water in a time before Egypt's deserts dried, is dismissed with a wave of the hand. Scholars like Dr. Robert Schoch, who presented careful geological evidence pointing to a pre-dynastic origin, were ridiculed or ignored. Not because the science failed, but because the implications did not fit the accepted story. And the story must be preserved. Mainstream Egyptology has built a vast narrative, a timeline where dynasties rise in order, each achievement explained, each monument tied to a pharaoh's reign. To admit that the Sphinx might be older, that it might predate the very civilization it supposedly honors, is to crack that timeline at its foundation. What happens if we pull that thread? Suddenly, Egypt is not the beginning, but a continuation, a receiver, not a creator. And the Sphinx is no longer a tribute to a king, but a relic from a time we do not remember. That idea frightens institutions, because it means we've misunderstood our place in the long story of humanity. And so, the doors stay locked. The permits are withheld. The questions are buried again, like the Sphinx once was, beneath layers of dust and official denial. But curiosity doesn't die so easily. The more we're told not to look, the more we wonder what lies beneath. Why are we afraid to dig, to listen, to test the stories we've told ourselves? The Sphinx does not resist our questions, but many modern voices do. Tonight, as you drift into the quiet edges of sleep, ask yourself what is harder to face: that the Sphinx is simply what we've been told, or that it might be something far older, far stranger, built by hands we've never known. Sometimes the loudest silence is the one we create to protect ourselves from the truth. In the narrow darkness of the Great Pyramid, beyond the grasp of tourists and torchlight, machines once moved where no human had ever set foot. They were small, no larger than a suitcase, and designed to slip into spaces too tight for flesh and bone. Their names were simple: Upuat, Pyramid Rover. Little explorers on mechanical wheels, sent not to prove legends, but to map the unseen. And then, something strange happened. They started to find things. In 1993, a robot named Upuat 2 rolled up one of the narrow shafts leading from the king's chamber. For decades, these shafts were thought to be symbolic airways, aligned with the stars. But no one had ever seen where they ended. Upuat found out. At the far end of one shaft, deep inside the pyramid, was a door. Not a simple stone block, a sealed slab, fitted tightly, with metal pins embedded in its face. Copper, a sacred metal to the ancient Egyptians, used in rituals, tied to divinity. What was behind the door? No one knew. Nearly a decade later, in 2002, a new robot was sent. Pyramid Rover, sleeker, with a small drill and a camera on a fiber optic cable. It was tasked with peeking behind the slab. The world watched. The robot drilled through the stone and slid the tiny camera inside, and found another door. Beyond the first slab, there was a second one, also sealed, also unmoving. A second mystery behind the first. After that, the mission was paused. Further exploration was promised. Plans were announced, but nothing followed. The door remains unopened, the shaft untouched. Another robot mission proposed years later was abruptly halted without explanation. What was discovered, if anything, was never made public. And yet, the curiosity lingers. Why send robots into these ancient shafts if they were meaningless? Why equip them with drills and cameras if there was nothing to find? Why halt the missions the moment something unexpected appeared? Perhaps what they found was unsettling. Or perhaps what they might have found was even more so. Because sealed doors inside a pyramid do not fit neatly into the stories we've told. They hint at design, at purpose, at secrets intended to remain hidden for a very long time. And the Sphinx? It sits nearby, just as silent, just as sealed. Whispers tell of chambers beneath its paws. Radar scans have suggested voids. But once again, the digging stops before it begins. Tonight, as your thoughts drift deeper, imagine those robots resting now in the dark, still, quiet, their lenses blind, facing doors that haven't opened in thousands of years. What waits behind them? Why has no one gone back? Or maybe someone has, and we were never meant to know. In the soft glow of candlelight, a monk once turned the pages of a scroll. Its script was ancient, older than the Coptic tongue he spoke, older than the empire that ruled his land. Symbols danced across the parchment in a language he could not read, but he understood the weight of it. The scroll was kept hidden, wrapped in cloth, sealed in a clay jar. Not because it was sacred, but because it was dangerous. It spoke of beacons of stone built before the world was divided by words. It whispered of monuments that marked the stars, and of a civilization that watched the sky long before the pharaohs ever rose. And then, the fire came. Not a wild blaze, but a careful one. Not a chaotic accident, but a quiet purge. The scroll never reached the scholars. It was taken by men in authority, declared heretical, and fed to the flames before anyone could copy it. They said it was a forgery, a fabrication, a relic best forgotten. And so it was, almost, but not completely, because the monk remembered pieces, shapes, lines, a phrase repeated twice. Before language, they left a memory in stone. That memory may live in the Sphinx. There have been many lost texts like it. Not all were burned. Some were buried. Others simply vanished, libraries emptied during conquest, temples looted, knowledge dismissed as myth and discarded before its value was understood. In ancient Mesopotamia, tablets that told of pre-flood kings were once labeled fiction until the flood layers in the earth began to confirm them. In Egypt, the priest Manetho wrote of a time before dynasties, before Menes, ruled by demigods and shadowy beings. His writings survive only in fragments, quoted in later works, their context lost. And always the most troubling records seem to disappear. A fire at the Serapeum. A sealed tomb never reopened. A document cited once, and then never seen again. Is this the erosion of time? Or the hand of silence? The Sphinx bears no scrolls, no tablet lies beneath its paws, at least none we are allowed to find. But perhaps that is why it was carved. Perhaps the builders knew that ink fades, that fire finds libraries faster than memory. Perhaps they chose stone not for its strength, but for its silence. Because silence, once it is noticed, becomes the loudest clue of all. Tonight, as your thoughts grow still, imagine that scroll in the monk's hands, the light flickering, the words speaking of monuments that outlived their makers. And then imagine the smoke curling up as the parchment turns to ash. A page of history erased, but not forgotten. Not entirely. Not while the Sphinx still waits. Across the sands of Egypt, stone rises where time has fallen. Temples stacked upon ruins, sanctuaries built over older sanctuaries. Beneath every layer, another waits. Foundations laid not for the present, but for what came before. In Luxor, in Karnak, in Abydos, you find this strange repetition. New dynasties, carving their names over old ones, claiming what was already there. Ramses builds where Seti built, and Seti built where someone else once stood. Always building, always replacing. but never destroying, as if they knew not to. Perhaps it was reverence, or perhaps it was fear. Because what if Egypt's great temples are not simply places of worship, but masks for something deeper? Not the original story, but the final chapter of a much older one. Imagine an architect who does not lay his first stone until the ancient one below has been sealed, not out of necessity, but out of duty. We call these places tombs and palaces, but they feel more like vaults, rooms that echo when they should absorb, stairways that lead nowhere, doors that never open, and most of all, names that are missing, builders who did not sign their work, kings who left no mark. Why? Because they were not meant to be found. Not yet. In Saqqara, near the Step Pyramid, archaeologists uncovered a network of underground galleries, their purpose unknown. In Dendera, the famed temple of Hathor is adorned with high-relief carvings, so crisp they look untouched by time. Yet the stone it sits upon is worn smooth, as though older feet passed through long before the temple's construction. In Abydos, the Osirian stands sunken deep into the bedrock, megalithic in scale, its age unclear. The pharaoh it's attributed to had no need for such a chamber, but he placed his name near it anyway. To honor it, or to hide it? Some believe these structures mark energy points, places where ancient science and spiritual power intersected. Others think they were observatories, aligned with stars, or libraries, preserving knowledge in geometry and proportion. But maybe they are something else entirely: guard posts. Not guarding riches, but records. Not to protect them from tomb robbers, but from time itself. And perhaps that is why the Sphinx remains untouched, not restored, not repurposed, just watched. Watched by modern eyes, by tourists and skeptics, but also by those who know. The keepers of the gate, the guardians of the past. Tonight, as the desert wind settles and your breath falls into rhythm with the ancient world, imagine Egypt not as a graveyard of the past, but as a sentry, watching, waiting, protecting something beneath the sand. Not gold, not bones, but truth. There is a language older than any script, older than hieroglyphs carved in stone, older even than the voice of myth. It does not need translation. It cannot be forgotten, because it is not born from culture, but from the fabric of reality itself. Mathematics. Look closely at the Sphinx, and more deeply at the Great Pyramid that rises behind it, and you will find this language whispered in angles, in ratios, in alignments that defy the limitations of time. The base of the Great Pyramid, for example, is a square so precise that its four corners deviate by only a fraction of a degree from true north. Its height and perimeter, when measured with care, encode the number pi and the golden ratio constants that describe not only structure, but nature, beauty, balance. And constants do not age. They do not depend on who carves them or when. They simply are. The same in Egypt, the same in India, the same on a distant world, 1,000 light years away. Whoever understands mathematics speaks the same cosmic tongue. The builders of Giza seem to know this. They align their monuments not just to the cardinal points, but to the stars. The Sphinx faces due east, greeting the rising sun as it has for thousands of years. But it's more than symbolic. It's positional. It watches the equinox, the moment of perfect balance between light and dark, as if marking time in celestial rhythms, not calendars. As if the monument itself is a kind of clock, and what a vibration. The king's chamber in the Great Pyramid. Its granite walls hum at 110 hertz, a frequency known to induce calm, even altered states. Modern researchers have recorded how tones resonate through the chamber, forming standing waves, lingering like breath in a sacred space. Sound as energy. Stone as conductor. This is more than architecture. It is intention. A message crafted not in words, but in form. One that says, "We knew how the heavens move. We knew the shape of earth. We knew how to sing to the stone." Not to impress, but to preserve, because language fades. Empires vanish, but pi endures. The golden ratio endures. Frequencies endure. Anyone, anywhere who finds these patterns knows someone was here who understood. So maybe the Sphinx is not silent after all. Maybe it speaks in mathematics, in geometry, in stars and stone. And its message is not a question, but a mirror. If you understand this, then you are ready. As your mind drifts tonight into those deeper places, imagine this language still humming through the desert air, carried in the angles of pyramids and the gaze of a lion-headed watcher, not asking to be worshipped, only to be seen and heard. If the Sphinx is a message, then someone must have been meant to receive it, not the kings who built temples in its shadow, not the conquerors who passed it by, mistaking silence for emptiness, not even the priests who once bowed before its gaze, reciting names now lost to sand. The Sphinx was not built for them, because messages meant for the present are written in language, in titles, in names carved deep so no one forgets who commanded the stone to rise. But this silent watcher says nothing of itself. No hieroglyphs, no claims, just form, orientation, endurance. As though its audience had not yet arrived. So, what if it was built for us? For a people far in the future, a civilization advanced enough to rediscover the constants, to measure the ratios, to hear the hum beneath the stone. A people who would look at the Sphinx and see not a riddle but a warning, or a guide, or perhaps a memory written in geometry rather than ink. And maybe, after centuries of sleep, that message is finally being heard. We now have the tools, lasers to map every angle, satellites to trace alignments, software to model the stars as they rose and fell in skies long forgotten, robots to peer into sealed shafts. The language of mathematics, once the province of mystics and scribes, is now spoken by our machines, and the earth itself, once thought silent, has begun to yield its story. Climate data tells us when the rains last fell on the Giza Plateau. Erosion patterns whisper of a time before dynasties. Beneath the dust, we're finding what might have been left for eyes that could finally see. But there's another part to this, not just technology, but readiness. Are we prepared to understand what we find? Or will we cover it again with newer myths, more comfortable timelines? Will we listen to the message, not just hear it, but receive it? Because if the Sphinx is what some believe it to be, a time capsule from a forgotten civilization, a monument built not for glory but for remembrance, then its meaning depends entirely on the receiver. Us. You. So tonight, as you lie beneath your own sky, think of that silent face, carved in ancient stone, watching, not just the sunrise, but the ages, waiting for minds clear enough, hearts humble enough, to ask not who built it but why. And if you're asking that question now, maybe the Sphinx has already begun to speak. The Sphinx does not move, but it marks time. With its gaze locked to the east, it watches the rising sun each day, just as it has for thousands of years. But the true story it tells is not about days or even decades. It speaks in the deep language of celestial cycles, in patterns that take millennia to unfold. Its eyes are set upon the point where the sun rises on the spring equinox, the moment of balance between light and dark. But over thousands of years, that point slowly shifts. This is the precession of the equinox as a grand wobble in the Earth's axis, completing a full cycle roughly every 26,000 years. A movement so slow, so subtle, that only the most patient observers could ever detect it. And yet the Sphinx seems to know. Many believe that when the Sphinx was first carved, It looked directly into the heart of the constellation Leo. That would place its construction not in 2500 BCE, but far earlier, around 10,500 BCE, during the so-called Age of Leo, a time when the lion of the heavens rose with the sun on the spring equinox, and the lion of stone looked up to meet it, a perfect mirror between earth and sky. If this alignment was intentional, it means the Sphinx is more than a monument. It's a marker, a device that tracks not just time but cosmic time, like a great stone clock set to the rhythm of the stars. And what does such a clock measure? Not hours, not calendars, but cycles of birth, destruction, and renewal. The rise and fall of civilizations. The turning of ages that shape the world in ways we are only beginning to remember. Because history, when viewed from such a distance, is not a straight line. It curves, returns, begins again. What was lost can be found. What fell can rise. And perhaps that is why the Sphinx was made to last, not just to survive time, but to measure it. Some believe its purpose was not only to remember, but to warn, that those who understand the cycles might prepare for their return. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine the stars slowly turning above you, not randomly, but with a purpose, a rhythm, a pulse. And below them, the Sphinx waits, its stone body still, its mind ancient, counting down epochs in silence, not forgotten, just waiting for us to catch up. Stone does not speak the way we do. It doesn't shout. It doesn't boast. It doesn't need to. What it says slowly, patiently carving, meaning not in sound, but in silence. The Sphinx has no voice, and yet it speaks. Not to kings or conquerors, not to the priests who walked in its shadow, nor the armies who passed it by. It speaks to time itself. It speaks to those who will come much later, after the dust has settled, after stories have changed, after empires have crumbled into myth. It was not built to glorify a name. No hieroglyphs, no royal titles, no prayers etched into its skin. What kind of monument leaves out the very thing all monuments are meant to preserve? The answer is simple. It isn't a monument at all. It's a message, but not one shouted in triumph, not one etched in a moment of pride. It's a whisper, a soft word carried across eternity, a word spoken in shape, in orientation, in the worn edges of a face that has looked upon the sunrise for thousands of years. If you could hear it, it wouldn't sound like speech. It would sound like stillness, like waiting. Whoever made it wasn't seeking glory. They were seeking memory, to outlast the flood of forgetting, to leave behind something that would not rot or fade or blow away in the wind. A language of endurance, of simplicity, of geometry and placement. Because stone remembers what paper cannot. It doesn't burn. It doesn't vanish when cultures fall. And so the Sphinx remains, half lion, half human, entirely silent, a paradox shaped from bedrock. Its voice is not meant for the ears, but for the soul, for that quiet place in you that feels the truth of a thing before it knows how to explain it. That's why we keep returning to it, in dream and in thought. Why scholars argue over it, why tourists stare at it and feel, without knowing why, that they are standing in the presence of something that matters, something that sees more than we do. And maybe that's what the builders intended all along, not to create an idol, but to plant a seed, one that would grow not in soil, but in the minds of those willing to listen. So tonight, as you close your eyes, listen not for words, but for the silence beneath them, the quiet gravity of a message buried in stone, a voice that needs no language, a whisper that waited for you to remember. If the Sphinx is a message, then what is it trying to say? It doesn't use words. It doesn't point with inscriptions or shout with symbols. But there it is, carved from a single ridge of limestone, older than the temples that surround it, staring forever toward the rising Sunday, still, silent, patient. Perhaps that's the message, patience, or endurance. Or maybe, remember. Because if a civilization once stood where now only sand remains, and if that civilization knew it would vanish, wouldn't it leave something behind? Not a diary, not a scroll, but something eternal. Something that could survive flood and fire, conqueror and time. Something like the Sphinx. Its gaze is fixed not just on the horizon, but on the cycle of time itself. It sees the sun rise and fall like breath. It watches the stars shift, the great wheel of precession slowly turning the sky. Ages come and go. And still, the Sphinx waits. Is it a warning? A gentle one, perhaps. That everything we build, no matter how mighty, can fall. That history is not a straight line, but a spiral. And those who forget its turns may find themselves repeating them. Or is it an encouragement? A reminder that even when everything else is lost language, cities, names, truth remains, encoded in geometry, in orientation, in stone. It tells us that knowledge can survive the fall, if we are wise enough to preserve it in ways that outlast us. Or maybe it's something more, a call to awaken, to look up, to remember not just what once was, but who we are beneath the layers of forgetting. Maybe the Sphinx was carved not to honor the dead, but to keep something alive. A truth, a story, a memory that matters. One we were never meant to understand right away, only when we were ready. So now the question turns back to us. Are we ready? Ready to listen without dismissing, ready to see without explaining away, ready to feel what cannot be proven, but lingers just beyond the edge of knowing. The Sphinx does not ask for belief. It asks only that we be still long enough to hear what it has always been saying. As you rest tonight beneath your own turning sky, let that question echo inside you. If this ancient being, half lion, half human, carved before memory, was meant to send a message across time, what do you think it's saying? And why now, after so long, do we feel like we're beginning to hear it? Some monuments are built to glorify the living, others to honor the dead. But there are a rare few that seem built for something else, entirely not to celebrate, not to mourn, but to remember when all else is forgotten. The Sphinx may be one of these, not just a monument to an era, but a lifeboat for meaning, meant to survive the storms of time. When empires fall, when languages vanish, when the books have turned to ash and the cities have crumbled into dust, stone remains, silent but not empty, unmoving but not unknowing. What kind of people would build a monument like that? Not kings seeking immortality, not priests writing their names into the sky, but a civilization standing at the edge of something they could not stop. A flood, a shift, a collapse. A civilization wise enough to understand that memory is fragile and time is ruthless, that the future might forget them entirely. So they carved something that could not be erased. They didn't inscribe stories. They didn't list names. They chose a shape that would speak in symbols, in direction, in proportions. A face that watches the sunrise across ages. A body that hints at the stars. A form so strange, so timeless, that even thousands of years later, we still do not fully understand what we're looking at. And maybe that was the point. The Sphinx was not made to be understood easily. It was made to endure until we could understand. Like a seed buried deep beneath the sand, waiting for the right conditions to grow, waiting for a time when we would begin to ask the right questions. Why no inscriptions? Why the water-worn body? Why does it face the rising sun? Why was it carved from a single, immovable mass of bedrock? Because something built for collapse must carry its message without help. No scrolls, no priests, just form and presence and alignment. A message that cannot burn, a truth that cannot be rewritten, a witness to the turning of the world. Tonight, as the stars drift above you and sleep draws near, think about the Sphinx not as a riddle to be solved, but as a message meant to last, through storms, through silence, through forgetting. It was not made for pride. It was made for you. A voice in the dark, calling across broken time, saying, "We were here. We knew. We remembered you. Now, will you remember us?" What if we've been asking the wrong questions? For centuries, we've tried to make sense of the Sphinx with chisels and tape measures, with dates and dynasties, trying to press it into the tidy boxes of history. Who built it? When? For what purpose? We search for blueprints, inscriptions, forgotten tools buried in the sand. We hope to solve it as if it were a puzzle left incomplete. But what if the Sphinx was never meant to be solved? What if it was meant to be felt? Not with logic alone, but with that deeper, quieter part of us that listens to music and understands dreams. The part that knows wonder without needing explanation. That hears silence and senses meaning within it. Because when you stand before the Sphinx, something changes. Not because you've uncovered a fact, but because something in its stillness speaks to your own. You feel time move differently. You feel small, but not diminished. You feel remembered. Perhaps that's what the builders wanted. Not to leave behind an answer, but an invitation to be still, to listen, to wonder. A message written not in words, but in presence. One that doesn't demand to be decoded, but simply held. That might explain its silence, its refusal to tell us who carved it, or why. Maybe it's not hiding anything. Maybe it's already told us everything it was meant to say, just not in a language we've been taught to hear. A face weathered by rain, a gaze fixed on the eastern horizon, a lion's body stretched out on the earth like an anchor. These are not clues in a mystery. They are lines in a poem. Lines that don't ask to be solved, only felt. And if that's true, then maybe we've missed the point all along. Maybe it doesn't matter whether the Sphinx was carved in 2500 BCE or 10,500 BCE. Maybe it doesn't matter whether it came from the hands of pharaohs, forgotten civilizations, or something stranger still. What matters is that it survived. It endured the collapse. It waded through the forgetting. And now it stands here, still offering its silence like a mirror. So we might look into it and see not just the past, but ourselves. So tonight, as you settle into sleep, let the Sphinx speak to you not in facts or figures, but in feeling. Let it be a mystery not to solve, but to hold in your heart. A shape carved into the bedrock of time, asking not to be explained, but remembered. The desert is quiet now. The wind has calmed, and the stars stretch overhead in their endless wheel. They shine with a cold, familiar light, the same light the Sphinx has watched for thousands of years. And tonight, it watches over you too. You lie still beneath that vast Egyptian sky, as the sands cool beneath your body, soft as velvet, older than memory. The air carries no sound but the hush of your breath, and somewhere beyond that, the slow breath of the earth itself. And above you, the Sphinx waits. It does not sleep. It never has. With its lion's body and weathered face, it holds a presence that does not ask for anything. It's simply island, watching, remembering, enduring. The gaze it casts is not only eastward, toward the rising sun, but inward into the deep chambers of your own knowing. You do not need to understand it. You only need to be near it. It has seen empires rise and fall, languages born and lost, cities swallowed by time. It has stood through rain and drought, silence and noise, reverence and neglect. Yet still it remains unmoved, unbroken. There is something comforting in that, because while our lives rush forward with so many questions and so few answers, the Sphinx reminds us that not everything needs solving. Some things are simply meant to be, like the stars above, like the breath in your chest, like this moment, as you begin to drift. Let your thoughts slow now. Let the shape of the Sphinx become soft in your mind, not as a riddle to be solved, but as a presence silent, eternal, and kind. Let it watch over you, just as it has watched over every traveler who has passed beneath its gaze. and just as it will continue to, long after the world has changed again. Whatever its origin, whatever message it holds, if any at all, the Sphinx is still there, and that is enough. So sleep now, beneath these ancient stars. Let the questions rest too. You are safe. You are held. And just beyond the edge of dreaming, the Sphinx waits, not to speak, but to remind you that not all mysteries need answers. Some simply need time.